स्थिते मनसि सुस्वस्थे शरीरे सतियो नरः धातु साम्ये स्थिते स्मर्ता विश्वरूपं च मामजं ततस्तं म्रियमाणं तु काष्ठपाषाणसन्निभम् अहं स्मरामि मद्भक्तं नयामि परमां गतिम् सकृतेव प्रपन्नाय तवास्मीति च याचते अभयं सर्वभूतेभ्यो ददाम्येतत् व्रतं मम सर्वधर्मान् परित्यज्य मामेकं शरणं व्रज अहं त्वा सर्वपापेभ्यः मोक्षयिष्यामि मा शुचः तस्मात् त्वम् उद्धवोत्सृज्य चोदनं प्रतिचोदनं प्रवृत्तिं च निवृत्तिं च श्रोतव्यं श्रुतमेव च मामेकमेव शरणम् आत्मानं सर्वदेहिनां याहि सर्वात्मभावेन मया स्याहि अकुतो भयः मया स्याहि अकुतो भयः. Last week we relished the Charamopaya in Uddhava Gita. We celebrate in our Shastras 3 Charama Shlokas. Varaha Charama Shloka, Rama Charama Shloka, Sri Krishna Charama Shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. Of which the most popular Charama Shloka is the Sri Krishna Charama Shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. Uddhava Gita too has a Charama Shloka which also gives the Charamopaya. And we discussed at length this beautiful Charamopaya declared by Krishna once again to Uddhava. And we also saw how this Charamopaya expands and extends the Charama Shloka of the Gita. We are relishing the 12th chapter of the 11th skanda of Srimad Bhagavatam. And we are at a very crucial stage in this conversation. Now, we saw how Krishna ends the 11th chapter promising Uddhava that he is going to share Paramam Guhyam. The 12th chapter of the 11th skanda builds on the foundation of the pathway to Sharanagati. Before Krishna declares the Charamopaya, he discusses the sevenfold collapse of the ego. It's very important for us to recall this in order to understand the role of self-effort in our spiritual sadhana and the efficacy of Sharanagati. So Krishna talks about 7 collapses of the ego. The first collapse is the collapse of the ego of achievement. Krishna basically declares, hey Uddhava, I am not conquered by intensity, I'm conquered by intimacy. The second collapse is the collapse of the ego of conceptual mastery. Love reaches where intellect cannot reach. Krishna can be conquered only by love, not by our intelligence. The third collapse is the collapse of the ego of eligibility. Bhagavan does not respond to our credentials. He responds to our unflinched, undivided longing. And we must understand how, as Krishna discusses each of this collapse of the ego, he is essentially referring to the Gopikas of Vraja. This conversation happens when Krishna starts to reminisce about the glory of the Gopikas. The fourth collapse is the collapse of the ego of moral control. Krishna does not dismiss Dharma, he reveals the destination. He takes the example of the Gopikas who transcended not just Samanya Dharma, even Vishesha Dharma, because for them ultimately Krishna is the ultimate Dharma. That is the fourth collapse. The fifth is the collapse of the separation tolerance. Our ego makes us numb to separation. We don't even realize that we are separated from Krishna. The Gopikas teach how separation is ultimate pain that one endures in samsara. So the fifth collapse is the collapse of ego of separation tolerance. And the sixth collapse is the collapse of the ego of direction. Again, the Gopikas teach that we realize eventually that we do not pursue Krishna. It is Krishna who is pursuing us. And all that we need to do is to allow him to pursue us. This is where the ego collapses to realize this foundational fact. And eventually the collapse of the ego of self-improvement, where through the Gopikas, we realize that Bhagavan is not waiting for our perfection. He is only waiting for our availability. In the process of trying to become perfect through our spiritual sadhanas, we only make ourselves unavailable to Krishna. So essentially preparing for the Charamopaya, Sharanagati, Krishna talks about the 7 collapses of the ego. And through the Gopikas, he reveals how Krishna is not attained by those who approach him with correctness. He is attained by those who cannot live without him. And the beauty of the Charamopaya here in Uddhava Gita is that Krishna speaks thinking of the Gopikas and how the Sharanagati that was performed by Gopikas shows us the way for the ultimate surrender to him. Tasmatvam uddhavotsrijya chodanam pratichodanam pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. By renouncing all the dharmas, dharma sadhanas for moksha that are prescribed in the Shruti and Smriti, shrotavyam shrutamevacha, that which has been heard, that which is yet to be heard, Mamekam sharanam. Not even Mamekam sharanam. Here Krishna is all the more categorical. Mam ekam sharanam. Now, there are two things here. One is to renounce the dharma sadhanas, the moksha sadhanas, renounce dharma. The other is to hold on to Krishna's lotus feet. Essentially, detach and attach. So the question that one may ask is, what is the ultimate way? Is detachment the ultimate way or the attachment the ultimate way? Krishna very clearly answers, neither detachment nor attachment. Then what is the ultimate way, hey Krishna? He says, the one who makes you to detach from the world and attach to him, he is the ultimate way. That is why Mam Ekam Eva. So there, even Sharanagati is not the Upaya. Sharanagati, what we do, also cannot be considered Upaya. Krishna alone is the Upaya. So that is once again being reiterated here. Atmanam sarvadehinam yahi sarvatma bhavena mayasyahi akuto bhayaha. So we discussed how this Charama Shloka runs in parallel to the Gita Charama Shloka. Now, Bhagavan once again has given the ultimate upaya to Uddhava. Now, in the case of Arjuna, Charama Shloka happened right at the end of the Gita. But here the case is very different because Uddhava is on a different pedestal. Uddhava is a Parama Bhakta. The foundation has already been there. Now, Uddhava, after listening to this Charamopaya, has a very important doubt. This is where we come to one of the most subtlest of topics in philosophy that Uddhava raises. Immediately after Krishna declares the Charama Shloka, Uddhava then responds, Hey Krishna, Samshayashrinvato vacham tava yogeshwareshwara na nivartata atmastaha yena bhramyati me manaha. Uddhava vacha. Samshayah shrinvato vacham tava yogeshwareshwara. Krishna is Yogeshwara. We know that. But Uddhava again addresses him not just as Yogeshwara, Yogeshwareshwara, Ishwara of all Yogeshwaras. This is another beauty in Uddhava Gita. Uddhava constantly keeps using adjectives for Krishna, which are very beautiful. He says, Hey Krishna, I'm still confused. Now, this is a very subtle shloka. Very carefully needs to be understood, because this is coming immediately after Krishna's declaration of the Charamopaya, declaration of Sharanagati. Now he says, I still have a doubt. I have a samshaya. Now we may wonder, Charama Shloka means Charama. The ultimate upaya has been given. What can be the doubt? Now, obviously here the conversation is still not come to the Charama. Charama means end, ultimate, but the upaya is ultimate, but the conversation is still continuing. But for our sake, Uddhava comes up with a very important doubt. He says, Na nivartata atmastaha yena bhramyati me manaha. I still have turbulence in my mind. There is something which is still not clear to me. Who is asking this? Uddhava is asking this. What is that which is not clear? Uddhava says, I am confused. I am not confused with regard to the upaya. That is very clear. Sharanagati, with the example of the Gopikas, is very clear to me now. Obviously, the moment the Gopikas were invoked and Krishna spoke about the Prapatti Marga, everything became clear to Uddhava and hopefully to us as well. So, upaya itself is very clear. So my doubt is not with respect to the upaya. My doubt is not with respect to the Sharanagati Tattva that you declared. I have some other doubt. What is my doubt? Atmastha. My doubt is with respect to Atma Vishaya. I still have several doubts. Now, we must recall what is now triggering this doubt of Uddhava. In the 11th chapter, Krishna also talked about how the Paramatma also indwells in the body along with the Jivatma, as the Upanishads declare, Vasuparana, Sayuja, Sakaya, Samanam, Vriksham, Parishasvajate. Now, and since then, Uddhava has been waiting to ask this question. To him now it's very clear. The Jivatma ultimately has to surrender to the Paramatma, no doubt. But there is one question, one doubt that I have regarding the position of the Jivatma itself. What is that doubt? What is that samshaya? What is that which is bewildering you, hey Uddhava? He says, the Atma is an indweller in the body, in the Deha, along with the Paramatma. Who governs the prana, the Pancha Pranas? Who governs all the Indriyas? Is it the Paramatma or is the Jivatma? What controls? Who is the controller who is essentially taking care of how my mind functions, how my intelligence functions? Now, if both the Jivatma and the Paramatma are indwellers, is samsara only for the Jivatma or is the Paramatma also a samsari? Because he is also a co-traveler along with the Jivatma and he is there in every embodiment the Jivatma takes. Who is the Adhara for the body? Is it the Jivatma or is the Paramatma? Who is the Adhara for all the Indriyas? Is it the Jivatma or the Paramatma? Who is the Bhokta? Who is the actual experiencer? Is it the Jivatma or the Paramatma? Essentially, Uddhava's question, here the doubt. Uddhava has just asked one line question. So we need to understand the intensity and the depth of this question. Because Based on Krishna's answers only, we can actually understand the depth of Uddhava's question. Uddhava's question is, I understand that Sharanagati, Prapatti is the ultimate means, no doubt. But what is the role of the Jivatma? What is the role of the Jivatma? Does Jivatma have any role at all? Because ultimately, as when Krishna says, Mami ekameva sharanam, if the Jivatma has to let go, we also discussed last week, Sadhyopaya versus Siddhopaya. Sadhyopaya is Bhakti Yoga, where Upaya has self-effort. Bhakti Yoga means there is self-effort. Siddhopaya, Bhagavan's lotus feet. The Upaya is always there. So in the case of Siddhopaya, there is no role for self-effort. And we also discussed last week the progressive stages of Sharanagati. Markata Kishora Nyaya, Marjala Kishora Nyaya. And eventually, let go means letting go of everything with utmost faith. If that is the case, what is the role for the Jivatma? This is the question that is still bothering Uddhava. Because he also wants to understand that as an indweller in the body performs several functions and Bhagavan is the Sarvadhara. What does the Jivatma actually do? Even in its surrendered state, does it play any role at all? So very deep, very subtle question to which now when Krishna answers here, Krishna provides an answer. But this answer alone is not enough for us. How do we get the full picture of Krishna's answer? We must go back to 18th chapter of the Gita. Because a part of the answer is there in Bhagavad Gita and part of the answer is there in Uddhava Gita to get a complete answer to Uddhava's question. So let's see first how Krishna answers immediately to Uddhava's doubt. He says, Bhagavan Vacha. Sa yesha jivo vivara prasutihi pranena ghoshena guham pravishtaha manomayam sukshmam upetya rupam matrasvaro varna iti stavishtaha. Hey Uddhava, the subject of your doubt, the Jivatma, is no doubt an indweller in a body, in an embodiment. The Jivatma enters every body along with the prana. He says, Sa yesha jivo vivara prasutihi pranena goshena guham pravishtaha. Guha, Hridaya Kamala, it's like the cave where along with the prana, when the Jivatma enters, it enters, he also says, pranena ghoshena, prana ghosha. There is a new term here Krishna introduces. What is prana ghosha? Prana ghosha is the inner sound of the prana. We can only hear this when we cut off the external sound. No, we have to completely tune out from the external world to connect to the internal sound. This is the universal sound, the sound of the prana. And this prana ghosha is there in every body. Now, why Krishna is talking about the prana ghosha? He says, Manomayam sukshma upetya rupam matra swaro varna iti stavishtaha. This prana ghosha works in every body. Now, this is in a subtle form, and the vak indriya, the indriya which is responsible for speech, when it functions, this subtle sound manifests as gross sound, and what we get is matra, swara, varna. What is matra? Matra means measure of time. Hrasva, dirgha, pluta. These are all the time, that measure of time for making a sound. One matra, two matra, three matra, not medicine. Matra is measure of time. When we chant the Vedas, the matra becomes very, very important. Swara, intonation, pitch. Udatta, anudatta, swarita. The pitch with which we make the sounds. Varna, articulation of the sound. How is the sound generated? From which part of the body? whether it is from the chest, whether it is from the throat, whether it is from the lips, whether it is from the teeth, or the tongue is used. Every articulation of a sound makes a change to the way the word is understood. Now, what Krishna here is saying, all these are happening from one universal prana ghosha. Now, the vocal cords work automatically, the entire body is working automatically. What is making the change is essentially the intention of the jiva. So, therefore, there is a role that the jivatma plays. Now, just let's pause here. We'll come back. We'll continue with other shlokas. We'll come back again because we are here investigating the role of the jivatma in the body. ಯಥಾನಲಕ್ಕೆ ಅನಿಲ ಬಂದುರ್ ಉಷ್ಮ ಬಲೇನ ದಾರುಣಿ ಅಧಿಮತ್ಯಾಮನಾಹ ಅನುಪ್ರಜಾತೋ ಹವಿಷಾ ಸಮೇಧತೆ ತಥೈವ ಮೇ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ರಿಯಂ ಹಿ ವಾಣಿ. He says, he gives an example, just like when two arani sticks are taken and they rub together, heat is produced with the contact of the air, then a spark comes, and then with the wind the spark becomes a fire, and then when the ghee is poured, then the fire grows. Similarly, the subtle prana ghosha takes several forms and becomes matra, varna, swara, and so on. And he adds, tathaiva me vyaktir iham hi vani. Krishna is just giving here one example of vak indriya, how the vak indriya functions. Then he goes on to say, evam gadi karma gatir visargaha घ्राणोरसदृक् स्पर्शश्रुतिश्च संकल्प विज्ञानम अथाभिमानः सूत्रम रजस सत्व तमो विकारः. Similarly, hey Uddhava, just like how the vak indriya functions, and that function is my adhinam, tathaiva me vyakti riyam hi vani. It is my control. The vak indriya is dependent on me. He makes a very important point here. Similarly, every indriya, be it karmendriya or jnanendriya. What are the karmendriyas? Vak, pani, pada, payu, upasthanas. The karmendriyas which are responsible for physical actions. What are the jnanendriyas? Chakshuhu, shotram, grana, sparsha, rasana. All these are jnanendriyas. The functions of all these are dependent on me, he says. Now, which means when they are dependent on me, I govern them, he says. Essentially telling Uddhava, you, the Jivatma, does not govern them. Now, so here comes the question. What is Krishna here implying? Very important to know what is the role of this physical body made of Prakriti. When I say physical body, body, senses, mind, intelligence, and the indwelling Jivatma and Paramatma. This is where we understand the subtleties of who is doing what. Now, first question. Are the body, senses, and mind independent of the Jivatma? The answer is no and yes. I see some people nodding saying no. Some people are thinking, why am I even asking this question? Is the body, mind, intelligence, the senses independent of the Jivatma? You may even wonder, why is this question even being asked? How can it be independent? It should be dependent. And I say the answer is both yes and no. Now, why I say yes and no? Functionally, the body, senses, and the mind are autonomous from the Jivatma. Because, let us look at it. The heart keeps beating. The lungs keep breathing. The mind is producing thoughts. Blood is being circulated everywhere. Digestion is happening. Is there any effort from the Jivatma in any of these functions? In none of these functions, the Jivatma has any role to play. Then how is this body miraculously working? That is the role of the Paramatma. The Paramatma has created a beautiful infrastructure which miraculously works. That is why life is a miracle. I don't try to breathe. I breathe. If I have a problem, yes, but all my physiological functions are involuntary. Eating is what I do. Digestion is not what I do. Digestion Paramatma does. Aham Vaishwanaro Bhutva Praninam Dehamashratah. I do the easy work, he does the tough work. I eat all the junk and then he works overnight trying to digest it. And we are very creative. We eat all creative things, and he gives him the challenge. Now, if we see, therefore, Bhagavan, Paramatma guarantees that this body works in a certain way. He not just gives an instrument, he gives a working instrument to the Jivatma. The Jivatma has an instrument that is given. The body, senses, mind complex is a beautifully designed, autonomously functioning system. And how is the system working? Obviously, Paramatma is the Adhara. Paramatma is one who is sustaining it. It is not the Jivatma is sustaining it. But you must understand, while the senses see, well, the senses do their job, chasing the sense objects, they are not purposive. The eyes will see, but the eyes will see everything and anything. What is the role of the Jivatma? The role of the Jivatma is to give a direction, give a value, give a purpose to the functions of the body, mind, and senses. It is the Jivatma who directs. The eye will see involuntarily anything and everything that is presented. Now, it is my will, individual will, which I can exercise to ensure that I direct my eyes towards certain things which I want to see, and I direct it away from something which I don't want to see. So who is giving the direction? Who is giving the purpose to these senses? That is the role of the Jivatma. So therefore, is the body, mind, senses complex, independent? Yes. Is it dependent? Also, yes. So it's yes and no to that question. So what is exactly the role? The Jivatma does not operate the system. It orients the system. Operations are left to the Paramatma. Jivatma orients it. Jivatma has Sankalpa Shakti. Jivatma has Anumodana Shakti. It can say yes or no, because it also has the experience, Bhoga Shakti. And it also has one more Shakti, to identify with its own body, mind, sense complex. That is something which the Jivatma faithfully does, and also own it. This is where now we start to understand why Krishna says you cannot own the functions of your senses and your body as your own. The Jivatma starts to believe that it is the owner of what the senses does, whereas in reality it doesn't own. The senses are governed to function by the Paramatma. The Jivatma uses and gives it a direction and gives it a purpose. The body is designed to interact mechanically, because the body and the senses are like a machine, because it's achetana, prakriti. And the senses automatically interact with the sense objects. And when they interact, the physical reaction is also automatic. No. When I see a sweet laddu, my tongue waters. This is a physical reaction. Now, we must understand that there are three levels in the inner world: the body, the mind, and the consciousness of the Atman. Now, at the level of the body, there is physical reaction. Every external stimuli by design will trigger a physical reaction, whether I want it or not. This is the manufacturing defect in the body. Now, the next stage, this physical reaction then will lead to an emotional activation of a desire in the mind. The third stage is a conscious intention. Now, only when we understand these three progressive stages, we also understand that we have a choice to stop the progression. We have a choice to stop a physical reaction that results in an emotional activation of a desire, not to get converted into a conscious intention. This is where the volition, the will, the effort, the sankalpa shakti that is given to an Atman. So therefore, the Atman has a very important role to play, but it is not a complete Ishvara. Ishvara is the complete ruler. Atman is a sub-Ishvara. It has controllership, but limited controllership. The controllership that is given to the Jivatma is for directing the body, the senses, the mind, is for also giving the value. It is what is valuable to be seen, to be heard, what is not valuable to be seen, not valuable to be heard. This is in the domain of the Atma. So therefore, what Krishna here is saying, understand here, Arjuna, that the Jivatma does not govern the functions of the body. It is in my adhina. So to answer Krishna, to Uddhava's question as to what is the position of the Atman, now this is where we must go back. The extension of this we find in the 18th chapter, the famous shloka. Adhishtanam tatakarta karanam cha pritak vidham vividhascha vridhascheshta deivam chaivatra panchamam. This is where we understand that the Jivatma is one amongst five factors. When we say causal factors for any action, there is no single agency. Adhishtanam, karta, karanam cha pritak vidham, vividhascha pritak cheshta, daivam. Five factors. Adhishtanam is the sharira, kshetra. Now in the 13th chapter, Krishna calls it as kshetra, the field. This is where the Jivatma experiences, expends its karma. That is the adhisthana, the base. Adhishtanam, tata karta. Jivatma is a karta, is a doer. Krishna always speaks in riddles, right? When Arjuna says, hey Krishna, am I the doer? Yes, you are the doer. Hey Krishna, am I the non-doer? Yes, you are also the non-doer. I am the doer, I am the non-doer at the same time. Essentially meaning, the soul is not the soul doer. The S-O-U-L, soul, is not the S-O-L-E, soul doer. It is a contributive doer. So here, in the 18th chapter is the extension of what he's telling to Uddhava here. One, he says, all your bodily functions, all your indriyas are governed by the Paramatma. Even with the karmendriyas, the actions that you do, when you look at the agency of the actions, there are several causal factors, primarily five. One amongst the five causal factors is the karta. Adhishtanam, karta, tat karanam cha pritak vidham. Karanam here is karmendriyas along with the mind. Pritak vidham, because there are different types of actions that we do with all the karmendriyas. Karanam cha pritak vidham, vividhascha pritak cheshta, the pancha pranas. The pancha pranas govern the physiology, the functioning of the body. Again, we don't do anything. No, be it breathing, be it assimilating the food that we eat, being the evacuation of the, or eliminating the unwanted from the body, circulation in the body, or the expression, the speech, everything is a product of prana, the pancha pranas. They are the fourth causal factor. Vividascha pritak cheshtaha daivam. The fifth is Paramatma himself, who is the ultimate cause, the cause of all causes, the sole cause. Immediately we say, thank God we found the answer. The cause of all causes, now he is responsible for everything. I do something wrong, see, he is the cause of all. If he is the cause of all causes, then he should be the cause of the good I do. He should also be the cause of the bad I do. Isn't it? Now we found the right excuse. This Krishna himself has given us the excuse to blame everything back on him. Now, this is where we have to go back to how Krishna describes in the Gita the agency of any action. I don't know how many of you were there when we discussed in depth in 18th chapter of this shloka. I'll do a quick recap so that we all understand what Krishna here is giving the message to Uddhava. When we look at the agency of any action, every action can be looked at as happening in three phases. Adya pravritti, Dvitiya pravritti, Tritiya pravritti. Essentially phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. For the sake of understanding, we're just breaking down. So what happens at the beginning, which is Adya pravritti, the initiation of any action is based on the will of the Jivatma. So the Jivatma initiates. And what does Bhagavan do in this phase? He is Udasina. He remains a witness. He allows the Jivatma to initiate the action because after all, the free will has been granted to every Jivatma by the Paramatma. So phase 1, Adya Pravritti, the Jivatma initiates. Bhagavan's role is Udasina. Phase 2, Dvitiya Pravritti. Now the Jivatma is now carrying out the action. The action is started. What is the role of the Paramatma? The role of the Paramatma is Anumanta. Anumanta means sanctioner, one who sanctions. Very important here to understand that everything happens as per Bhagavan's sanction, but may not be as per his intention. We must know the difference between Krishna's intention and Krishna's sanction. He sanctions everything. If I do right, he sanctions. If I do wrong, he sanctions. Because he has given me a free will that I am supposed to put it to right use. Phase 2, Dvitiya Pravritti, Bhagavan is Anumanta. Phase 3, Tritiya Pravritti, is Bhagavan from Anumanta, he becomes Dyotaka. Dyotaka means one who empowers, one who becomes the agent of the action. Now we may immediately ask, so if I do something wrong, will he become my Dyotaka? Will he empower me to do the wrong? So this is where we need to look at the subtlety here. When I do right, he becomes a Dyotaka. When I do something wrong, he remains a Udasina. When a wrong deed is done, he is a Anumanta. He sanctions, but he remains a Udasina, a witness. And not just an ordinary witness. Even when he is a witness, he is a reciprocal witness. Krishna is not some impersonal energy. He is a personal being, always reciprocating. He reciprocates with everybody. I love him, he reciprocates. I avoid him, he reciprocates. Now, how does the reciprocation happen? When I avoid him, he reciprocates by being a witness and he lets his law of karma take its own course. But when I love him, he reciprocates. He can break his own law if needed and when needed. And he empowers me. He becomes the Dyotaka. He becomes the real agent. I become the instrument. At that stage, I'm nothing but just an instrument, nothing more, nothing less. He becomes the real agent of the action at that stage. So we can possibly look at Krishna as somebody who is impartially partial. He's partial, he's impartial. Why he is impartially partial? He is partial to those who love him, but he is impartial because he, without any discrimination, opens the door for everybody to love him. He is impartial, he is also partial, he is impartially partial. So he is Udasina, Anumanta, Dyotaka, or he remains a Udasina and he lets. So therefore here the message to Uddhava, when Uddhava asks, what is the Jivatma's position? The Jivatma's position is very clear. The Jivatma's position is to recognize that the Sharira complex, which is the body, mind, and the intellect, senses, and the mind, It is a working system. The beauty here is this system, who decides how does the blueprint for this body is decided? The blueprint is provided by the Jiva. Because it is Jiva's karma which decides the nature of the body. So the Jiva brings the blueprint. Bhagavan says, I like the blueprint, I will construct. And how does he construct? He uses the material for construction, which is Prakriti. So this is how the three tattvas come into play. Prakriti is the building block used to construct this body, mind, intelligence complex. The blueprint, the design is determined by the karma of the Jiva, and Bhagavan ensures the construction goes on. He is the ultimately mayadhyakshena prakritihi suyate characharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. He is the ultimate adhyaksha. And therefore, to question of Uddhava, hey Bhagavan, am I the controller or not the controller? Again, in Krishna's characteristic style, riddle style, yes, you are both. You are controller, not the controller. Controllership is given to you, hey Uddhava, to such an extent that you use your control to choose your ultimate controller. The controllership is given to every Jivatma only for one purpose. The scope of the controllership that we have is to choose who is our ultimate controller. Unfortunately, in the next shloka, he explains the Jivatma ends up choosing Prakriti as its controller and ends up in Samsara. When the Jivatma chooses Prakriti as its controller, it ends up in Samsara. When it recognizes Bhagavan as its ultimate controller, it gets moksha. It is as simple as that. Therefore, he says, I am hi jivas trivrid abjayonihi avyaktayeko vayasasa adyaha vishlishta shaktir bahudeva bhati bhijani yonim pratipadya yadvat. When the body, the indriyas, all the functions are in my adhina, under my control, who is the samsara for? Samsara is for you, hey Uddhava, not for me. I am an indweller, no doubt, but it is the Jivatma which is essentially identifying with the body and giving over controllership to the body made up of three gunas. And in that process, what happens? Vishlishta shaktihi bahudeva bhati. The Jiva, the Avyakta, the Jiva, eko vayasasa adyaha. The eternal nature of the Jivatma is to always, Jivatma is to have infinite consciousness. The consciousness of the Jivatma is infinite. But unfortunately, in Samsara, it shrinks. And this attribute of consciousness, which we call it as Dharma Bhuta Jnana, when it passes through the mind, the senses, and it engages with the external body, and it has several states like joy, grief, desire, greed. All these are various states of this consciousness. That's why he says, Vislishta Shakti Bahudeva Bhati. The consciousness is splattered. It takes several forms. It goes through expansion and contraction. And he says, Bijani Yonim Pratipadya Yadvat. Just like how when different seeds are taken and planted in different fields, they grow into different trees. The tree depends on the seed and also depends on the essence of the field as well. So similarly, depending on the seed that every Jivatma carries, it grows with different fields, the essence of different fields. Now here, since he has given this example of seed and a tree, Krishna extends that and he says, let me talk to you about the Samsara Vriksha. In the 15th chapter of the Gita, Krishna talks about a different kind of a Samsara Vriksha. Urdhva Moolam, Madhashakam, Pashvattam, Prahuravyayam. Here, that is a macro level Samsara Vriksha. Here, Krishna is talking about a micro level Samsara Vriksha. Both are beautiful. There, he is talking about the entire Prakriti Mandala as Urdhva Moolam, Madhashakam. Now, here, he talks about for every Jivatma, there is one Samsara Vriksha. And he explains that. So, Uddhava, let me talk to you about samsara vriksha. Dveyasya bije shatamulastrinalah panchaskandaha pancharasa prasutihi tashaishka shako dvisuparna nidaha trivalkalo dvipalorkam pravishtaha adanti chaikam palamasya gridha gramechara ekam aranyavasaha hamsaye ekam bahurupamajyaihi mayamayam vedasa veda vedam. No, same thing, who is a Vedavit? One who knows that the Vriksha is the Vedavit. Here also, one who knows the Samsara Vriksha. But how can this Samsara Vriksha can be known? This is important here. He says, Maya, Ijjaihi, Mayamayam, Vedasaha, Vedavit. Mayamayam, this Samsara Vriksha is a product of Prakriti. How can one know? Ijjaihi, by the help of those who are worshipable through a Guru. The one who knows the Samsara Vriksha through a Guru, he is the one who is a Vedavit. Now, what is the Samsara Vriksha? The Samsara Vriksha, again, we can visualize this beautifully. This Samsara Vriksha is not an inverted banyan tree. There it is inverted because he is talking about the macro. Here it is micro. So you can still look at a Samsara Vriksha. He says, this Samsara Vriksha has flowers and fruits. The flowers are Punya Papa Karma. The fruits are Sukha and Dukha. Now, he says, Dve asya bije. The bija, the seeds for this vriksha is your own punya and papa. Your karma is the seeds, two kinds of seeds, punya, papa. Shatamula, the roots are shatamula. Because your vasanas, they manifest and take roots. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Raga, Dvesha, Bhaya, goes on and on. There are Shatamula. Trinalaha. The Trinalaha means lower trunk. The three gunas are the lower trunk of the tree. Panchaskandaha. Upper trunks are the Panchabhutas. Pancha Rasa Prasutihi. Pancha Rasa Prasutihi, the Shabdhadi Vishayas, the sense objects are all the Pancha Prasutihi. Dasha Eka Shakaha. There are Dasha plus Eka Shaka branches. 10 indriyas plus the mind. Visuparna, in this Samsara Vriksha, there are two birds, Jivatma and the Paramatma. Visuparna Nidaha. He beautifully says, they build a nest. The Jivatma and Paramatma in the Guha of Hridaya, building a nest, they dwell. Visuparna Nidaha. Trivalkaha, three types of barks. These are the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Tvipalaharkam Pravishtaha. This extends into two phalas primarily. Broadly, there can only be two phala. One is bhoga, other is yoga. Yoga here is moksha. Yoga means yujjate iti yoga, attaining Krishna. That is moksha. Bhoga in this Prakriti Mandala, moksha reaching Vaikunta, aprakrita Mandala. These are the two phalas. Adanticha ekam asya gridra. Now he says, in those who are immersed in samsara, immersed in enjoying the fruits of this tree, they remain in the samsara, and he says these are those who renounce, like the Hamsa. He gives the example of, if you see here, Gramechara ekam aranyavasaha hamsaya ekam. So when I stop eating the fruits of the tree, I become Hamsa, and therefore the one who becomes Hamsa eventually becomes applicable for the state of moksha. So he said, Mayamayam Vedasa Vedavit Hamsaya ekam Bahurupa Vijjaihi Mayamayam Vedasa Vedavit. So, and he goes on to say, Evam Guru Upasanayeka Bhaktya Vidya Kutarena Shitena Dhiraha Vriksha Jivasayam Apramattaha Sampadya Chatmanam Atatyajastram. We must again refer to 15th chapter. Narupamasyeha tato nalabhyate nanto najajir natam pratishta aspatamenam suvirudha moolam asanga shastrena dridena chitva tatah padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gatana nivattanti bhuyaga tvameva chadyam purusham prapadye. So therefore, in the 15th chapter, Krishna says, you have to cut this tree of samsara with the acts of detachment. Now, detachment is the effect. What is the source of detachment? Vidya, knowledge. There he talks of effect. Here is going to talk about knowledge. So source. with which you cut the tree of samsara. There he says, Krishna says, it is impossible for you to cut it by yourself, therefore surrender. Now, with that, he stopped there. Now he is expanding. How can I surrender to Krishna? Surrendering to Krishna is not easy. How can I do it? Here he says, Uddhava, let me tell you. Evam Guru Upasanaikya Bhaktya. It is through Upasana to a Guru that eventually surrender to Krishna is even possible. Therefore, when one does Upasanaika Bhakti to Guru, results in Vidya. This Vidya is the source for Vairagya, for detachment, which is the word with which Vidya Kutarena Shitena Dhiraha. A Dhira will be then able to cut this tree of samsara. Vriksha jivashayam apramattaha sampadya chatmanam atatyajastram. Eventually, this vidya that is obtained, this knowledge, jnana, which is the source of vairagya, to start cutting this tree of samsara, what happens once I attain Krishna? He says, Tyajastram, the knowledge is to be given up. Why? Because now knowledge is no longer needed. Knowledge is already flowered and blossomed into bhakti. So therefore, the function, the role of knowledge is over. All that remains is bhakti alone. Therefore, he says, he gives the example, he concludes the 12th chapter essentially saying, surrender to the Guru, and through the upasana of the Guru, eventually gaining that Paramavidya, the supreme knowledge, which essentially helps one to start cutting the tree of samsara. And by cutting the tree of samsara, eventually one can, in the process, simultaneous, also surrender to Krishna also happens there, one attains. So we discussed last week about sadhya bhakti and sadhana bhakti. Here, when jnana is being matured into sadhya bhakti, which is what is bestowed by Bhagavan. Because when we say bhakti and prapatti, by themselves there is no conflict. Bhakti yoga is a different marga, prapatti yoga is a different marga. We said there is prapatti in bhakti yoga, there is bhakti in prapatti yoga. To a bhakti yoga nishta, prapatti is required so that the obstacles to bhakti are removed. To a prapanna, bhakti is required because after I do prapatti, after I do sharanagati, what? I continue to do bhakti. That is sadhya bhakti. So basically Krishna says, with sadhya bhakti that is bestowed to him, he eventually attains me. So thus ends the 12th chapter of the 11th skanda of Srimad Bhagavatam. Uddhava Gita, of course, a lot more to go. But Krishna here establishes clearly the ontological relationship between the three tattvas, Jivatma, Paramatma, and Prakriti, and establishes why Sharanagati is not something which is a luxury. Once we understand this relationship, we stop asking the question as to why I must surrender to Krishna. The answer as to why I must surrender comes naturally once we understand this relationship between the three tattvas and the actual role of the Jivatma. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanamastu.